Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSPs. Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 1st of July 2024. We're going to combine the military aid and geopolitics video today into one because there's not a lot of military aid and equipment to talk about. Ukraine and Leopard 2. Who has pledged what and who has delivered? So Jeff 2146, who updates equipment going to Ukraine rather like Oryx. In fact, we are due to give him the details of the 4 snatched Land Rovers that we are in the middle of delivering. But he's got an update here on the Leopard 2 situation. So it goes, the first number is what has been pledged and the second number is what's been delivered. So the Canadians have pledged 8 and delivered 8 of their Leopard 2A4 cans, so the Canadian variant. The Germans have delivered all 18 of their pledged Leopard 2A6s. The Norwegians have pledged 8 and delivered all 8 of their Leopard 2A4s, NO, Norwegian variant. And the Polish have delivered 14 of their pledged 14 Leopard 2A4s. Spain have pledged 10 and delivered 10 of their Leopard 2A4s. Sweden, 10 out of 10 of their Stridsvagn 122 CD. They are the Swedish variant of the Leopard 2. And the German and Portuguese together have delivered 3 of their 3 Leopard 2A6 NL. And the Germans and Spanish, because the Germans are refurbishing some of these Leopards that are coming from different countries. So it's kind of a cooperation between the two. So none of those Spanish provided Leopard 2A4s have been provided yet. There 19 have been pledged. I think they're being refurbished at €1 million a pop there for Germany, in Germany, those Spanish ones. And then you got Dutch and Danish Leopard 2A4s, 14 have been pledged, none of those have been delivered at the moment. So that brings a total of 104 Leopard 2s pledged, of which 71 have been confirmed as being delivered. So that leaves 33 then still to go. So a fair amount of Leopard 2s to arrive yet in Ukraine. Now, NATO members this is a UK Defence Journal, NATO members transferred to Ukraine information that's collected during AWACS flights. This allows Ukraine to repel impending attacks. This is nothing we don't already know, really, but just some confirmation there. As indeed, Max24 says, PS, no way. UK Defence Journal confirming that is taking place, and that's so important. The Ukrainians had this asymmetry going on here with regard to really time-sensitive intel and the access to military satellites from the US, UK, France, so on and so forth. Actually, I think Russia have been able to strike fairly well recently, partly because of the intel they're getting from China, arguably. So that is a real shame that China is able potentially to be able to provide Russia with all that very useful satellite intel, because the Russian satellites, and I've reported this at length previously, over a year ago I was given detailed reports on how the Russian satellites are not nearly as good as the satellites being used to support Ukraine. Ukrainian singer Irina Fedyshin has raised money through her concerts to buy 60 vehicles for the Ukrainian armed forces. This is a fantastic video showing just, the power of rich people being able to, or people with decent platforms being able to provide a phenomenal amount of kit for the Ukrainian armed forces here. And I'd love to be a billionaire. Just like if I was Elon Musk, goodness me, Twitter would look different, but also I'd be providing all sorts of stuff like this just because it was good and right and I was able to do so. Max24 here saying reporting that Zelensky has stated that North Korea has about 5 million shells. This is less than what Russia uses per year. Russia is at great risk in its relations with China due to supplies from North Korea. I think that this is an indication that North Korea can and is helping Russia, but there's probably not an awful lot more that they can give to Russia. It depends what their own production capacities are, to be honest, but I was wondering whether Russia will have already exhausted the supply of North Korean ammunition. Right, moving now on to geopolitical topics. We're going to start with the Norwegian Foreign Ministry announcing that they've joined the 14th package of EU sanctions. So Norway isn't properly in the EU, a bit like Switzerland and indeed the UK, but Norway's got this a closer, more formal relationship with the EU. But it means that they have to ratify EU things like EU sanctions themselves independently if they want to follow on with what the EU is doing, and that seems to have taken place. Work has begun on introducing the sanctions into Norwegian law, the press release reads. We're already starting to see the economic impacts of Russian strikes on energy infrastructure as the International Monetary Fund downgrades their expectations for Ukrainian economic growth over the next 2 years. That is a shame. Ukraine is struggling, but if you think your economic output is going to rely invariably on the energy output of your country, like you cannot produce, especially like manufacturing industries, cannot produce enough produce and products if you have very inconsistent energy output. If your energy infrastructure has been hammered in the way that Ukraine's has, it's going to have a really big impact on your economic outlook. And so the IMF has revised Ukraine's economic predictions. Ukraine has a month to avoid default. This will happen if the government cannot agree with investors on debt restructuring, according to The Economist. In the long run, that could spell disaster for the country's recovery. So as much money as Ukraine are receiving from the IMF, from international partners, they are in a lot of trouble. And it looks like there might have to be some work done on debt restructuring. On the other hand, Russia's economy is worsening, says Jason J. Smart. Quote from, I don't know which news source this is. But anyway, profits in Russia's coal mining sector have plummeted by 93% in the first 4 months of 2024 to just 14.3 billion rubles, which is roughly $161.2 million. So as the headline here says, Russia's key coal industry on verge of financial collapse. As mentioned though here, people have been predicting the collapse of the Russian economy since 2014, and it hasn't happened. But in my opinion, it's because these things don't happen like that. Nothing happens for a long time, then it all happens at once, or it is just this case of chip, and then suddenly you're at a place where they cannot afford to prosecute that war. And indeed, Jay in Kiev then reports that Putin has successfully killed yet another cornerstone of the Russian economy, as the largest aircraft producer in Russia announces record losses. United Aircraft Corporation, UAC, announces an increase of net loss for 2023 of 47% to 3.48 billion rubles. That is a lot of rubles that they are losing. So that's an increase in what they're losing. And, you put that together with record mining losses or, being on the verge of collapse there. Profits, so record low Russian profits in the mining sector. So things are not looking good. Even if you're still making profits, if your predictions were up here, and they're down here, then that's going to affect tax income. That's going to affect, therefore, what Russia is able to budget for. And if they're not getting tax revenue in from the mining sector to the tune of a lot of money, then they're going to have to find that money from somewhere, or they don't have that money, or they dip further into their reserves. Joe Blogs did another video on Russian reserves recently. Now, moving on from economic matters to sabotage, NATO officials have, quote, strong suspicions that Russia may have mined critical EU submarine infrastructure in the North Sea, the British newspaper The Times has reported. According to the publication, such fears are based on data obtained from companies managing key oil and gas rigs, pipelines, electricity and telecommunications cables. Electricity and telephone cables, as well as oil and gas pipelines, were key targets for Russian intelligence services, especially after the start of Russia's full-scale military invasion in 2022 of Ukraine. The article states, according to the Belgian security services, no evidence of cable mining in Belgian or Dutch territorial waters in the North Sea was found. However, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, explosives were found on one of the British cables. A study by Belgian newspaper De Tige, or Tai, who knows? Belgians probably know how to say that. Which used information from ship logs, found that more than 160 non-military Russian vessels had engaged in 945 suspicious activities over the past decade. At least 749 of those 945 suspicious manoeuvres were carried out within 1 kilometre of pipelines in the North Sea. The Times material indicated another 72 suspicious actions were made in the area where electricity cables are located, and the remaining 124 in the areas where telecoms cables are laid. Quote, Russian knowledge of where cables and pipelines run is crucial if the Russians want to sabotage enemy communication systems, tap into or manipulate communications cables, British journalists emphasise. In general, the scale of operations of Russian security services abroad has reached a level, quote, not seen since the Cold War, the publication says. Observers believe that Moscow, quote, has had to rely increasingly on foreign nationals and in particular representatives of the criminal world to rebuild its network of agents after the expulsion of hundreds of Russian spies working in Western countries under the guise of diplomats. And it's that quote there that Max 24 pulls out: the scale of Russian secret operations abroad has reached a level not seen since the Cold War. That is really worrying. Almost every week a new secret operation with Russian trace is revealed. Recruitment went up. Special attention is given to students in pro-Russian countries. We, as I keep saying, we're at war with Russia, and this is what it looks like to be at war in this hybrid war with Russia, whereby our telecoms, I mean, it's not that they're going to blow it up right now, but they're getting, one would assume they'll be prepared that if it gets to a point where NATO nations are in a conventional war with Russia, then they can pull the trigger on munitions that are laid at the bottom of the sea, perhaps. That would be the speculation there. But that is my speculation. Now, David Cameron, I've actually sung the praises of David Cameron since he's become foreign minister. He is now, I think, being forced to put on his Conservative Party hat and do the duties of a Conservative Party that is tanking in terms of polling, PR, and all sorts. Just to let you know, I'm going to do probably a live stream with my mates on Wednesday night to do some pre-election. It's the UK elections on July the 4th, which is Thursday. So Wednesday night, we're going to go through the manifestos in a live stream just to give you, if you're interested, a bit of an update on the UK election. And then on Thursday, I'm going to go to the pub on election night with rugby dads from my kids' rugby team, but we're all going to be talking politics, no doubt. And then I'm going to come back. I won't have too much to drink because I'm then going to do another live with my mate, and we're going to go through just the early part of the elections as polls close. It'll probably be 11:30 to 12:30 UK time, just as those early results come through. Maybe an hour and a half of us just talking and checking out the election and talking British politics. So if you're interested in that, I'll be doing 2 live videos. Don't have a go at me that it's not about Ukraine. This is Geopolitics channel, and that's what I'm going to talk about. If you want to, you don't have to watch, but if you want to join in, check out those 2 lives. Anyway, David Cameron, the former PM and present foreign minister, has just, I think, had to do his party duties. As Edward Stringer says. Now, these are 2 opinions coming from people who are not classically like anti-conservative. These are, so Edward Stringer is a former RAF Air Marshal, that's it, retired RAF Air Marshal, trustee of the Imperial War Museum's senior fellow of Policy Exchange. So this is not your left winger here, saying, if this morning you're looking for a definition of shameless Etonian chutzpah, then look no further. So the quote is, Starmer is in danger of weakening UK's defences, say Cameron. And I'll tell you why this is essentially him having to do his duties, because he's essentially lying here. And I'll just explain why he's lying. So Shashank Joshi, who's defence correspondent at The Economist, again, no firebrand left-winger, so David Cameron, quote, and this is from the Times article, but he is... I'm sure. Anyway, David Cameron says, the last thing we need in Britain now is another liberal lefty lawyer running the country. Keir Starmer is in danger of weakening Britain's position and weakening Britain's defences. So that's what David Cameron has said in the Times. So calling Keir Starmer, who is a former Attorney General, like calling him a liberal lefty lawyer and saying that Labour are in danger of weakening Britain's position and weakening Britain's defences, which is what you'd expect him to normally say in a normal election. Why we know this is lying is because he's been caught on a leak saying completely the opposite. Anyway, Shashank Joshi says, utterly shameless from Cameron of all people. So you've got two people who are not classically left-wing, they're not particularly aligned to Starmer or Labour at all, saying that this is shameless politicising of David Cameron. And why we know this is the case is because recently Cameron was caught in I think he was caught by these was it the fake callers, telephone callers, hoax callers from, they might have even been Russian ones. Lord Cameron makes embarrassing Labour admission to hoax callers, said the Daily Telegraph. Foreign Secretary was hoodwinked into taking a call from a Russian prankster pretending to be a former Ukrainian president. In a video, so this is David Cameron speaking to Poroshenko, or who he thinks is Petro Poroshenko. So he has been perfectly honest here with this private conversation that ended up being recorded and leaked by Russian pranksters. In the video prank call, David Cameron said Labour would, quote, continue the current government's approach. He thought he was speaking to Poroshenko, yeah. So in the business secretary, no, where is it? Where's the actual words he said? This is it. So, asked by the imposter if he believed anything would change after the general election, Lord Cameron said, thinking he's speaking to the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, or President, is it? The opposition party, Labour, is as enthusiastic about defending Ukraine and helping Ukraine as the Conservative Party. I don't think you'll see change. Obviously, if they win, it will be a new government. There will be some getting up to speed on some issues, but I think fundamentally they supported everything we've done. He added, I think the Labour Party, if they win, will continue that approach. So the caller also suggested that David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary, did not have much experience. Lord Cameron replied, no, that's true, but I think the British policy is fixed. So asked about his engagement with Donald Trump, the former US president, the current presidential candidate, Lord Cameron said the Republican would want to, quote, back the winning side in Ukraine, but his attitude was hard to predict. He said, I had dinner with Trump and my aim was to convince him not to block money to Ukraine because obviously the speaker, Mike Johnson, wanted two things. He wanted to vote the money for Ukraine, but he also wanted to keep his job. And I thought it was important to try to make sure that Trump backed him sufficiently to do that, which is what happened in the end. I think ultimately Trump will calculate at the time what's right for him. This is right. You know, Cameron has Trump bang to rights here, which is that what he does is not for the good of the world, not even for the good of the US. It's for the good of Donald Trump. I think the key thing, if we can make sure that Ukraine is on the front foot and Putin is on the back foot by November 2024, then he will want to support the winning side, as it were. And that's what we've got to ensure. It's hard to predict exactly what his attitude will be, but that's the most important thing. Absolutely correct there. So anyway, point is that certainly on Ukraine, and maybe Cameron is saying, well, outside of Ukraine, then Starmer is in danger of weakening Britain's position and weakening Britain's defences, but that's not what you'd read from his words to Poroshenko, which is it'll be more the same. They can't afford really, and reality is Labour can't afford to try and attract all the centrist voters and swing voters and some of the Conservative voters with saying, hey, here we are as Tory light, as we're just going to be continuing many of the same Conservative policies. Much to the chagrin of the far left in the UK, they can't get away with saying we're going to continue to do the same things, yet be seen as weak on defence. And when you see Starmer in debate over the last few weeks, one of the things he has said is, no, we are serious. We're serious on defence. He's big on defence because he knows that's a big centrist and centre-right position, and that's where he wants to attract those voters. So I think this is campaign politicking from David Cameron, and that's why people like Shashank Joshi have said it's what did he say? Shameless. Utterly shameless, and indeed Edward Stringer, shameless Etonian chutzpah. So there you go. Now, I absolutely freaking love this. So if you don't know, as many of you from around the world won't know, Led by Donkeys is, oh no, it's not that, it's this. Led by Donkeys is a they've basically been around since 2016, putting out billboards and things on lorries and stuff that have been real tongue-in-cheek, showing how Brexit isn't working. They've been pretty much, they're a kind of Remain, anti-UKIP, anti-reform party people that do sometimes quite funny stuff, or they projected, it was led by donkeys that projected stuff onto the Russian embassy, I think, at the beginning of the war against Ukraine, which was really cool. Anyway, I freaking love this. So, led by Donkey said, we just dropped in on Farage's election rally with a beaming picture of Putin. Nigel was not pleased. This is absolutely delightful.
The poison that is being taught to our children. They are being told that the stories of Columbine don't matter. All they're being told are the bad things that we did in our history. And I'm standing up and saying, enough. We should be proud of who we are, where we come from. Who put that up there?
And Nigel Farage says Putin is the world leader he admires the most and blames the West for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine.
And the Columbine Centre needs to get the sack. Are we agreed? That is the case. Go on, put it down. Rip it down!
Of course, they're all getting up in arms, but the reality is Putin will absolutely love reform getting in. And this is some great trolling here, just supremely well done led by donkeys. Anyway, that was that. This has led then to people like Carol Cadwallader, who is a Guardian and other news, I think, organisations. She's a journalist. She did a TED Talk back in 2019 that took aim at mainly at like Facebook and social media organizations for their algorithms supporting which you can be said now for the rise of the right in Europe and lots of other political scenarios, but the algorithms really favoured Brexit. And she's saying, and Aaron Banks, he was basically the banker for Leave.eu. The Nigel Farage was involved with as well. The big Brexit organisation, and she pointed out that money came from Russia, and that Aaron Banks had met with Russian ambassador 4 times, all the stuff I talked about recently in a Bylines interview. Her TED Talk and herself, she was then taken to court for libel by Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks lost that, so she won that back, I think, was it 2022? Aaron Banks has appealed it and partially got some of that overturned in appeal. But anyway, Carol Cadwallader said yesterday, I think it was yesterday, you'll be shocked to learn Nigel Farage is using me as a punch bag at today's rally. So Nigel Farage took aim at her. Of course, he is. It was my trial that established the facts of Aaron Banks' relationship with the Russian ambassador. Will Labour finally commit to investigating foreign interference in our politics? What happened after 2016 is that the Conservative Party, who were ruling the UK at the time, it was Cameron that called Brexit thinking easily Remain would win. Then it didn't win. And then we ended up coming out of the EU. But there was interference, rather like the 2016 US elections and 2020 US elections. There was interference, meddling by the Russians in the Brexit election. And the British ruling government refused to release a report on Russian interference because they knew that would undermine the Brexit election. And then there would be people calling for a rerun of the vote. And actually now, if you're looking at polling now, it's probably likely, or it seems almost certain, that Remain would win because the polling very comfortably indicates that. And so the UK government have not wanted to to release such a report. Now she's saying, will Labour do a report into Russian interference into our politics? And she refers back to a 2022 before the it was partially overturned. She then refers back to this thread looking at what the court case, the libel case, actually turned out because back in 22 she said it almost did crush me, and indeed she owes like over £1 million now, I think, because of the some of it being overturned. But what it did find out is that the judgment is extraordinary, 117 pages of facts about Russia, Brexit, and the man who funded it. I was blown away when I read it. To judge the case on public interest, Mrs. Justice Steyn first had to judge if Aaron Banks had, as I alleged, lied. To do so, she examined his relationship with the Russian government in forensic detail. We now have this all on public record. This is what I claimed was the key lie. The public statement Aaron Banks made on the day of the Electoral Commission opened its investigation into his Brexit donation. He said his sole involvement with the Russians was a boozy 6-hour lunch. I said this was a lie. After examining all the evidence, the available evidence, this is what Mrs. Justice Steyn concluded. Aaron Banks' statement to the public and the Electoral Commission after its investigation had commenced was wholly inaccurate, but this is just the beginning of it. There's so much more. In her judgment, Mrs. Justice Steyn says Aaron Banks had at least 4 meetings with Russian officials. It would be wrong to expect a journalist from identifying such an inaccurate statement as a lie. The 4 meetings were probably not the full extent of it. She said, so on and so forth. Reasonable grounds for believing Mr. Banks shared information with Russian officials. Mr. Banks had been offered sweetheart deals. He used terminology suggested of a relationship in which he could visit the ambassador with ease, so on and so forth. There's more. It goes on and on and on and on. And that's all this stuff is being contested by Aaron Banks, or at least, whether you've got I mean, it's about how much evidence you've got to justify these opinions and whatnot, because otherwise it becomes libel, etc., etc. And in fact, if you go and look at the Cadwallader TED talk, it's now edited. You can't see the bits the claims that she made about Aaron Banks in that. TED have had to edit that out. But what is beyond doubt, in my opinion, in my mind, is that Aaron Banks has got connections to, and has clearly had connections to, the Russian ambassador and to Russia, and that money. There are many claims that still exist that money that came to the Leave.eu campaign had its source in Russia, and this is again Russia dividing Europe. It's in Russia's best interest that Europe is divided, and as such, we see this. So a reminder that a lot of the awful content being posted on social media is a product of grifters rage farming for their own profit, says Chris Owicki. And he did a whole thread on rage farming, which is when people, Marjorie Taylor Greene can be accused of this, which is when you say something, people like David Sachs and even Elon Musk, you say something so controversial, so horrid that everyone talks about it, and that gets you more clicks, and that gets you, and that's how Facebook works. That's how the algorithms of Facebook on all social media platforms work. I showed you, but I couldn't play it in the end because of copyright. But Russell Howard did a great comedy segment on this, showing how, for example, Facebook make money off rage farming. They farm the rage, and they just cream off the crops of that rage. Just it's incredibly annoying because it's nothing to do with whether truth has any value. It's about whether anger has value, and it has monetary value. Anyway, I digress. What Chris Owicki is referring to this, the biggest race baiting account on Twitter, or X, Radio Genoa, was run by a Cambodian Putinist living in Rome. He was just raided by the Carabinieri, so the Italian military police, who locked his account. His MO, inflating the migration issue and linking it to the EU. Good riddance. Now we're going to come back to this with what's happened in France. There will be a lot of people in France who have genuine issues about migration and about stuff going on in France, right? But there is also undoubtedly this amplification of existing grievances so that they become seemingly much more valuable, much more problematic than they really are. And this is what, in this case, your pro-Putin Cambodian chap living in Rome with a massive race-baiting account on Twitter does. How this man and others like him evaded the law for so long is a mystery. He was trying to undermine the EU and pit Europeans against each other, as well as boost petty nationalist parties through social media algorithm manipulation, but better late than never. And this is, I mean, you can read these tweets and whatnot, but yeah, it's just really, really frustrating that so much of the population is being manipulated into making decisions at the ballot box that benefit Russia. Jakub Janovsky from Oryx here saying they are a bunch of traitors and anyone voting for them at any level is a clueless idiot. Who's he talking about? Well, it turns out that Viktor Orban, who himself has been profiting from artificially whipping up these issues in his own country on the back of support from Russia. Orban creates a new far-right group within the European Parliament with the Czech Republic and Austria, or elements from their European MEPs. So Viktor Orban's party was kicked out of one group that I think is the one with Marine Le Pen in Rassemblement National, and he was going to join the it wasn't the ECR, was it the ID group? Anyway, he was seeking to join one of them again, or for the first time, and they wouldn't allow him in. So now he's going to start another far-right party with the Austrian Freedom Party leader Herbert Kickl and former Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. So this party will be a new coalition in the European Parliament. But also remember that Hungary are just starting, as of today, presidency of the EU. So from July the 1st until the end of the current year, Hungary will hold the presidency of the European Union and will be responsible for organising the work of the EU Council. So, of course, they can do things that delay assistance for Ukraine, delay voting. I imagine it's going to be like Judge Eileen Cannon for Donald Trump. That's how I see this going. Anyway. Be responsible for organising work of the EU Council, as reported by the official website of the Hungarian EU Presidency. The Hungarian Presidency programme will focus on 7 priorities, in particular strengthening the EU's defence policy, fighting illegal migration, addressing demographic issues, and supporting farmers and agriculture. Hungary's slogan is, Make Europe Great Again. Oh, I wonder where you got that from. Similar to, that's it, Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. So that's what's going on there. Then we'll take those ideas about whipping up issues to do with migration and look at yesterday's first part of the parliamentary elections. So just to let you know, there are 2 parts to the parliamentary elections for the National Assembly in France. They've got 577 districts. You vote for them in the first round, anyone in the first round, and unless someone gets over 50%, so there will be some people who've got over 50% and they get in straight away. But if you don't get over 50%, then you take the 2 biggest party votes and anyone actually over 12.5%, and they go through to the next round. So then you're kind of getting rid of the chaff and you're concentrating on the big candidates. And particularly in that second round, you'll get an awful lot of tactical voting, which the French are used to. But so in other words, so I was listening to someone said, I spoke to a taxi driver at some point in, I don't know, Marseille or somewhere, who said, look, I'm sick of voting against who I don't want. I want to vote for somebody. The problem, if you're consistently doing tactical voting, you're never voting for someone that you really believe in. You're just trying to stop someone truly terrible getting in. You're always on the defensive. And so there may be this kind of fatigue for tactical voting. Anyway, what happened yesterday? Well, National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, so that she's rebranded, remember? So when her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, was running it, I mean, he was it was called the National Front. I mean, this is the National Front. This is why people are so up in arms about this, just because it's had a rebranding and they've kind of softened their tones in certain areas or taken on some slightly left-wing policies or left-wing economic policies here and there to just try and attract the working class voters, but then really going hard on the culture stuff and particularly obviously migration. She has managed to, alongside, this storm getting whipped up with regard to migration in the EU across Europe, she's managed to get 33% of the vote. Now, there were some people expecting a higher vote yesterday, so this isn't as bad as some were think it could have been. But it's still really bad, right? This is imagine like in the UK, the BNP suddenly getting 33% of the vote, the British National Party, and you're like, what is going on here? So 1 in 3 voters voting for the far right. So the left-wing New Popular Front. So you've had this alliance to try and react against the Rassemblement National, National Rally. The NFP has got together all these left-wing parties, some of them really far left, and others more to the centre have got together, and they got the second largest vote block of 28%, and then Macron's party, the Together coalition, reached 20%. The result marks the first time RN has won more than 20% of the vote in a parliamentary election and puts the party within reach of forming the country's first ever far-right elected government. However, the final results and exact makeup of the 577-seat parliament are far from certain, and the RN's chances of winning power will depend on the political deal-making made by its rivals over the coming days ahead of Sunday's second round. In the past, traditional right and left-wing parties have struck agreements to stand down candidates from the runoffs to avoid splitting the vote against the RN, but the tactical voting strategy known as the Republican Front to block the RN is less certain than ever. So actually, as I said, some people are tired of that, and also you've had some Republicans, so Les Républicains, centre-right, a bit like the Conservative Party in Europe, in UK, they only got 10% of the vote, and they've had some bleed from some of their people going across to Rassemblement National. The leader of NFP, so the left-wing coalition, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's not a fan of giving aid to Ukraine. So you've got the far right and the far left, not seemingly the good option for Ukraine. And the centrists getting squeezed out. But he said that leftist alliance would withdraw all its candidates who came third in a round, saying our guideline is simple and clear, not a single more vote for National Rally. So that's quite good, because that will then favour either the centrists or maybe Les Républicains. So that's good. But the map's not looking good. I mean, most of the map is brown. It's better than the European elections, but it's not great. In a written statement, Macron called on voters to rally behind candidates who are clearly Republican and Democratic. But based on recent declarations, while that would include candidates representing the NFP's more moderate left-wing parties, it would exclude candidates from Mélenchon's France Unbowed. That's his own party. Anyway, that's what's going on there. And people have come out and said a number of things. Christelle Morancet here, saying regional council president for Pays de la Loire, has said that in the case of a face-off between National Rally and New Popular Front, my personal position is clear: blank vote. So some people are not prepared to go far left as much as they're not prepared to go far right. So there is a distaste for both sides of the coin. Well, it's not really. There is a middle ground. Polish leader Donald Tusk has said he's issued a warning about the far right in Europe as a whole, but in France too. Quote, they love Putin, money and power without control, and they are already in power or are reaching for it in east or west of Europe, he wrote on social media. They're joining ranks in the European Parliament, so go back to Viktor Orban and him getting together. In Poland, we reversed this fatal tide on the very last moment. Let's not waste it. And in fact, there are some calling for a move to go similar to the UK. Yes, this is it. Clement Beaune, a Macron ally, has pointed out to the upcoming British election in his plea for France not to turn to the far right. Quote, at a time when our British friends are about to turn a page from demagogic nationalism, let's not dive into it. Coming out of it is long and painful, he said. So there you go. Lots to discuss with regard to those French elections. So here is the these are on exit polls, so things can change, I believe, and indeed 34% is actually being reported as 33% elsewhere. They've obviously gained an awful lot, and the centrists have lost 4%. The left alliance has gained a little bit. Some of these other ones have lost a little bit. So the ECR, that's on the far right. The far right, and then the very far left has gained a little bit, but the very far right, interestingly, another far right party has lost some. EPP, so these are Les Républicains, has lost 4%. So 4% of the Les Républicains has probably gone to the far right here. 4% of the centrists have, and 3% of this other far right have gone into here. So they're building a lot of momentum. The Rassemblement National. And so War Translated here says, so let me get this straight. Russian propaganda says Europe is full of Nazis, fascists, far right, whatever you want to call them, and that's bad. So by this logic, Russia should be against them because Nazis is the reason for invading Ukraine. Then you have the far right leading in the election, and they actually like Putin and Russia, which finances them. What a mess. So this is a really good point. So Russia partly supposedly invaded Ukraine to get rid of the Ukraine Nazis. Ukraine are polling something like less than 3% far-right electorate sympathies in Ukraine. Like, they didn't get enough in the far-right in Ukraine for them to get any... not enough to feature in the elections, right? And so everyone was like, oh, far-right's really big in Ukraine. And then... everyone votes in Europe and the far right are rife across Europe. No one has a right to complain about the far right in Ukraine. No one is not good enough. Least of all the Russians who say, oh, look at the Ukraine Nazis in Ukraine. Meanwhile, funding or amplifying the voices of the far right in Europe. It's absolutely... it's very clever. You can argue from Russia, of course. I mean, I'd say it's insanely disingenuous and morally egregious. But of course, that's no concern of theirs. Unsurprisingly, the National Rally came out on top in the first round of the snap parliamentary elections. Cohabitation, says French aid to Ukraine, that's with Macron as the president, but a different party as the prime minister. With the RN, cohabitation with the RN will have an impact on Ukraine's deep strike capabilities, the supplied Mirage 2000-5s. I hope that's not affected. And other capabilities that do not fit with Rassemblement National's definition of, quote, defensive weapons. So you could get Bardella coming in and saying, no, that's not going to happen. We pull the purse strings. There are some... we're going to go on to look at this in a second. Right. Republicans against Trump. Remind people of Marine Le Pen's quote from 2017. Quote from the RN leader. The policies that I represent are the policies represented by Mr. Trump. They're represented by Mr. Putin. So that tells you kind of what she thinks and kind of puts that triumvirate of... people together in one bucket there. Mujaba Rahman, who is a French managing director of Eurasia Group, says, whatever happens next Sunday, the best case scenario for France from here, a G7 member, a permanent member of the UN, and a key member and driving force in the EU and a leading force in a pro-Ukraine camp. You've got to remember, France is super important. No matter what happens now, is going to weaken France's support of Ukraine, no matter what. Best case scenario is that it will be largely rudderless for a year. Macron has been overwhelmingly repudiated by voters only 2 years after winning a second term in the Elysee. His reputation and 7-year project to prepare France and the EU for the economic and geopolitical challenges of the 21st century arguably lies in ruins. Sad day for France and the EU. He did want to modernise. You could say some of his policies were unpopular with the French working class, raising the retirement age and stuff like that, and things that for some people saw as actually right-wing politics as well. But in terms of Ukraine and foreign policy, he is really important for Ukraine. Yoni Ascola here says, hey, keep calm. So this is a Finnish PhD candidate trying to help Ukraine by mocking disinformation. Anyway, he says, keep calm. The results of the first round of French legislative election are in line with Macron's plan in calling the election. Despite what many will claim tonight and in the next few days, the result tonight is neither an earthquake nor a surprise. All polls pointed in that direction, and the results align precisely with Macron's plan. Macron's objective in dissolving the parliament was to place the Rassemblement National in a cohabitation government for the next 3 years, compelling them to govern and reducing their prospects of winning in the 2027 presidential elections. For those of us, myself included, who are unwavering in our determination to prevent the far right from winning, this may seem paradoxical. However, for the purpose of reducing the RN's chances of winning in 2027, their victory in this election is crucial. The second round promises to be intriguing, and it will be pivotal to observe whether the RN can secure an absolute majority. Another question arises: should we hope for their attainment of this majority or not? Predicting the outcome of the second round in France is always challenging. There will be numerous triangulaire with 3 candidates competing in the second round, further complicating the predictions. The NFP, the left-wing coalition, is still actively pursuing a victory. Nonetheless, forecasts suggest a potential triumph for the RN, the Rassemblement National right-wingers. Mélenchon, the left-wing leader, is evidently vying for the role of potential next PM, a development that would be unfavourable for those striving to prevent RN's success in 2027. If the RN obtains an absolute majority, they will be unable to evade their responsibilities or make excuses. Conversely, if they fail to secure it, the advantage will be that they won't easily achieve their objectives and will face difficulties in governing. Okay, just a little bit that connects these guys to reform. Nigel Farage had what he called a contract, a manifesto, that was completely unfunded, pie-in-the-sky stuff, promising that to the voters. And they go, yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, we'll vote for you, but not enough to actually get him in. That's been the kind of same for RN. So a completely unfunded manifesto where people would say, that sounds brilliant, but now they've actually got a chance of getting in. So then they've promised this stuff to the electorate, they'll get voted in, and then they go, oh, bugger, we don't have the money to do that. Maybe Macron's making the right decision on doing that, and oh my goodness. And the reality of actually ruling a country, which is a massive economy, and you've got to balance the sheets, means that those populist policy notes will be absolutely untenable. And that's what Macron is hoping, that you get in, you try and lead. Oh, look, it's more difficult than you thought, shouting off from the sidelines. Yeah. Now it's up to you to make those sums work. Right, good luck with that. So France's tripolarization has become a tangible reality. Macron has actively sought this, and now it is materializing. It will be intriguing to observe whether his gamble pays off in 2027. So that's the presidential election. Those opposed to the RN should wish for the NFP not to achieve success in the second round. Having Mélenchon as prime minister would be the most effective method to pave the way for the election of an RN president in 2027. So this is a really good point. If you got Mélenchon with his firebrand left wing in to rule in the parliament now, instead of Rassemblement National, there's this big reaction against the far right. Then you get a far left leader who then comes in and makes a pig's ear of it. And then that will make people even more hungry for a far right kind of realignment in 2027 for the president. And the president has much more powers than the prime minister. Anyway, it'd be considerably worse than an RN government at present. So it's worse to have an RN president than an RN prime minister. Suspiciously fluffy fella says a short thread about the French. So another quick, sorry I'm spending so long, but it's so freaking important. This is the heart of the EU. I don't understand the media-sponsored doom and gloom over the French parliamentary election. It looks like nobody knows how the French political system works. 1. France is a presidential republic with separate elections for the president and parliament. 2. They are voting now for parliament, not for the president. This means that until Macron is president, next 4 years, there will be no major shifts in French foreign policy anyway. I think there'll be some purse strings, and there might be some change there, but broadly, you could argue that, yeah. 2, France has a mixed double-turn elections. Whatever happens in the first round may easily be undone, in particular when the wings are involved, because the wings are less likely to attract votes in the second round. The only way for right-wing RN to win a majority is getting a lot of votes from the left, which seems obviously unlikely. 3, the large support for RN was expected and is mostly based on immigration and Palestine protests. The French, as most Europeans, are fed up with the uncontrolled immigration from hostile countries that have no intention to integrate. This is a wake-up call for the left. 4, I am convinced that the decision to anticipate the parliamentary elections is to prevent Russian meddling. With less than 1 month of campaign, Russia couldn't mount any propaganda stunt or cause any crisis like they did with the EU elections or any other elections in the EU. 5, RN, as all populists, largely benefits from being an opposition force, always finger-pointing, that's what I was saying earlier, never facing reality, never proposing viable solutions. It's necessary to put them on the front line to unmask their lies. Giving them more space in parliament will deflate them. 6, Western media has become totally detached from reality. They are always going to for the cheap doom and gloom because that fear sells. They are drifting from information to pure entertainment with no accountability. This is our main challenge for this decade. Agreed. Note how the media tends to always be critical of moderates. Boring. True. Inadvertently sponsored populists. Exciting. Outrageous. This is so true. I have changed my views quite a lot recently, and I have become more centrist in a number of things because I think stability is way more important in the long term, but it's it's not glorious enough, and it's very easy to shout for either side, like it's being mentioned here. But there is a value to boring centrism. Then when people switch to populist extremists because of that, the media start scaremongering. Oh my God, democracy is at risk. No shit, Sherlock. Insane. The media were the watchdogs of democracy, but they are now so committed to profit and private interest that they can't barely perform their duty. This is the same in France, by the way. The media has been largely taken over, well, in some areas by the populist right. There's a general lack of morals in the media, profit over principles, and no accountability whatsoever. We have to fix this. This is interestingly why I actually support The Guardian, literally because of their economic model and their moral backbone. So you can call that all liberal, lefty, whatever, but actually you look at how it's structured and it's way, way superior to any other model of any other newspaper in the UK. And it means it's not easy for it to be manipulated by moneyed interests. Okay, then going on to the US. This is going to be a long video today. Goodness me! Oh my goodness. I'll probably leave it here. I'll do a separate US section to the geopolitics video. 50 minutes long enough. I do apologize. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll speak to you relatively soon.